Hi, it's Summer, and this is my August wrap up. Everything that I read in August, except for one book, was an audiobook. I was able to get a lot of reading done though, actually. I think I read 9 books. Don't quote me on that though, I didn't count before this. The first book that I read in August was Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. I'm obsessed with this cover, which feels kind of strange to say since the house is like bleeding. So this was my very first book from Sarah Gailey, and it's horror, and I really liked it. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars, but I think about it so often I'm kind of tempted to bump it up to like a 4.5. This one is about the main character who was going back to her childhood home to take care of her mom because she's kind of on her deathbed. They have a really strained relationship, so you kind of learn a little bit about that as the book goes on. We know from the beginning that something really weird happened in this childhood home, but the whole entire story is you kind of unraveling what happened. And it's also told in dual timeline, back when she was young living in the house, and then present day when she's there taking care of her mom. I'm going to read what I said on Goodreads really quick. I said, "This was such a creepy and unique horror story. I loved the slow pacing and how the story just gets under your skin. I really liked the ending and would love to see this as a movie." This book wasn't like an in-your-face jump scare type of horror book. You just read things that like slowly get under your skin, and the descriptions are just unsettling enough to make you feel weird. I actually read this book while I was vlogging a little bit ago, so I do have that video. I'll link it up in the cards. But in that video, I gave an example of the writing where there's like a flashback scene of this girl, the main character, going fishing with her dad, and she's putting a worm on the hook and she's like describing what the worm is like. And then in a present day scene, they're eating dinner and they're eating like noodles, and the noodles are described kind of the same way as the worms were. And so it's just gross and makes you feel weird, but I loved it. I think that this book is super polarizing. A lot of people really hate the ending, but I personally really liked it. It was just weird enough that it really worked for me, and it was unlike anything that I've ever read before. I also would 100% recommend the audiobook for this one. I felt like the narrator did such a good job with all of the voices and the way that they delivered lines and stuff. It just felt perfect for the story. So anyway, I really loved this book, 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. This was also my first Tessa Bailey book. The main thing that I've heard about Tessa Bailey books is that they are steamy, and that was correct. This one follows Piper, I'm pretty sure that's her name, and she's an LA it girl. She's rich because of her stepdad, and she just like hasn't grown up. All she does is party all the time, and she has like a bad group of friends and stuff that are like a bad influence on her. One night, her and her friends break into a hotel and throw a huge party, and it gets stopped by the cops, and she spends the night in jail. And so the next day, as punishment, her stepdad is taking away her access to the money, and he's gonna send her to this little coastal town in Washington state and make her kind of rough it a little bit to kind of humble her. It's a small coastal town that specializes in crab fishing, and their biological dad is actually from there. Piper has a sister. I think her name is Hannah. And Hannah ends up going with Piper so that she's not totally alone. One of the other reasons that they were sent there is because their biological dad left them like an apartment above a bar that he owned. So when they get there, it's super run down, and the whole entire story is them kind of like meeting the people in the town, refinishing and opening up the bar, and just kind of getting to know their dad through this town that they're living in. I thought it was a sweet story, and I really liked the romance. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next 2 books that I read were actually rereads. So the first one was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I wanted to read this because the last time that I read it was in 2016, so it's been a long time, and I wanted to kind of like refresh my memory, mainly because the movie got announced and also because there's a sequel coming out. I ended up loving it just as much as the first time. I gave it 5 stars. It still holds up for me. I just felt so connected with the characters. Some of the writing is a little bit cringy, like one of the scenes where she's gardening in her like childhood, like high school perspective. Like that dialogue was a little bit cringy or a lot of it cringy actually, but I love the rest of the story so much that I can like get over that. I just felt like because Colleen Hoover was so close to the subject matter that she was writing about in the book, it just felt that much more authentic. You ended up caring for all of the characters, and that made it so much harder when things started happening. I guess I haven't really said what this book is about. It follows the main character, Lily. It's dual perspective, so you're following her while she's in high school and also present day. Back in high school, you're hearing about her experience living with an abusive father, and also her friendship with a boy that she goes to school with named Alice. And then in the present day timeline, you're hearing about her opening her own floral shop, falling in love with a guy named Ryle, and I just really loved it. I read this in the same reading vlog as Just Like Home, and I think I also read It Happened One Summer in that same vlog as well. So if you want any more like in-depth thoughts on any of those books, and I think there's one other one that I talk about. Anyway, I have a lot more thoughts on these books in that video. And then my next reread was A Magic Steeped in Poison by Judy I. Lin. The first time that I read this one, I read it physically, and then this time around I listened to the audiobook. This one is an Asian-inspired high fantasy. and the magic system revolves around tea. My rating and all of my thoughts are still the same for this one, so I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. I didn't change my Goodreads review since the last time that I read it, but I figured just in case you haven't seen one of those previous wrap-ups, because I did read this book just a couple of months ago, I figured I would just reread my Goodreads review really quick just in case. I said, I really enjoyed this, super impressive for a debut novel, and I will definitely be continuing in the series. My only complaints are that I wish it was longer so that the magic system could have been better explained and explored, and that it was adult instead of YA, and also that we had a map. Really loved the setting, the magic, and the politics though. The next book that I read was Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. I am so sad that this series is over because I have absolutely loved it. This story is about Eve, obviously, like the title says. She comes from a wealthy family and she's been like living off of their money, and she keeps like starting her own businesses and then just quitting them, and her family's kind of sick of it. They're ready for her to grow up and act her age, again, like the title says. And so they kind of cut her off and they tell her that she'll have access to their money again once she has proven that she can keep a job for 6 months. Or maybe it's a year. So she's upset and she leaves and finds this little like bed and breakfast and randomly applies for the job and ends up getting it. This book is a little bit of like enemies to lovers because the owner of this B&B really doesn't like Eve, but they end up kind of growing on each other. Eve really loves music, so that's a big part of the story as well. And just like all of Talia Hibbert's books, this had really great representation. This one kind of mainly focused on autism rep. And then the next one that I read is the sequel to It Happened One Summer, and it's Hook, Line, and Sinker by Tessa Bailey. This one follows Piper's sister Hannah. She works in the film industry in LA and is super into music, and she wants to get into sound mixing eventually. The film that she's working on needs a really good like place to film, and so she recommends the coastal town from the first book. This book is really following her trying to like find her connection to her dad. There's a ton of music stuff in this. It just shows a lot of the stuff about her job and also her relationship with one of the characters from the first book. I thought this was cute, but I didn't like it as much as It Happened One Summer, so I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. This next book, I need to get a physical copy because I loved it so much. This one also has a really awesome cover. It's The Cartographers by Pung Shepherd. On Goodreads, I said 4.5 rounded up to a 5. I was not expecting to love this book as much as I did. It was the coolest mix of National Treasure vibes, dark academia, secret societies, and really unique magical realism. Even though I didn't love some of the choices that were made and found a lot of aspects of this book predictable, it didn't ruin the story for me. If you're looking for something unique and easy to read, I highly recommend this one. I also recommend the audiobook as it is full cast. This is a multiple POV story about Nell, who is in the cartography field, and so was her dad. She used to work with him at the New York Public Library, and they had a huge falling out over a specific map, like over 10 years ago, and she hasn't spoken to him since. And then the synopsis says, but when Dr. Young is found dead in his office at the New York Public Library with the very same seemingly worthless map hidden in his desk, Nell can't resist investigating. You meet so many characters from Nell and her father's past. The storyline of her dad in his college days is where like the dark academia vibes come in. The magical realism with the maps, and also just the fact that like there's a map that has been like tracked down and it has been like destroyed and every copy of it has been stolen. It's just so intriguing, and it was just such a fun time. So like I said, 4.5 out of 5. This next one, I don't even know if I should count it, but I guess I'm going to anyway. It was like the shortest book ever, but it's the Egyptian Book of the Dead. They technically don't know who specifically wrote it because it's a gathering of all these different texts from ancient Egypt from different times and different places. So it doesn't have just one author, but the translators are Mark Oxford and E.A. Wallace Budge. I've always loved ancient Egypt, even as a kid, and so I just have like an interest in it. And lately I've had like a specific interest in like the religion of ancient Egypt. So I've heard from a lot of people that the Book of the Dead is a good place to start. But honestly, so much of this went over my head, and I was listening to it on audio, so a lot of it I would just kind of like zone out for. So I think that if I'm gonna read this again, I need to like physically read it, and like hopefully there will be like pictures and a whole entire like guide to all of the gods of ancient Egypt and stuff. I didn't really feel like I wasted my time with it though, because at 1.5 speed it was only 45 minutes long, so it's not like it took a ton of time to read or anything. I feel very neutral about it. I don't really know if I would recommend it or not, but I decided that since it's like a religious text that I'm not going to rate it. Okay, we're to the second to last book, and this one I actually read physically. It's The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle L. Jensen. I loved this. I gave it 5 stars. This is about Laura, who has been raised her whole entire life to be like a deadly assassin spy. Her father is the king of their kingdom, and all of their people are like starving and not doing good. And they put the blame on the Bridge Kingdom, or Ithacana, I think is what it's called. So this is the map. There's a big kingdom here and a big kingdom here, and then there's this like small stretch of land right here that's called the Bridge Kingdom. because it basically is just a huge bridge. And they control all of the imports and exports to all of these other kingdoms. So if they wanted to, they could just like starve an entire kingdom. They have a lot of control. And so that's why Laura's dad is blaming the Bridge Kingdom, is because he thinks that they're like not giving them good supplies and it's hurting their country. To join their two kingdoms, Laura's dad is going to have her married off to the king of Ithacana. But when she gets there, she's supposed to infiltrate and tear him down and help her dad take control of the bridge. When she gets there though, she's kind of finding out that the whole entire situation is a lot more gray than she thought, and that maybe her dad hasn't told her everything. I just really loved this and enjoyed everything like start to finish. I loved the romance, I loved the descriptions of things, like I could very vividly see this whole entire world. I loved the characters, I loved the politics. Allie let me borrow this series from her and she told me, she was like, I don't know how more people aren't talking about this book series because it's so good. And I definitely agree with her. So yeah, I love this, 5 stars. You need to go read it. And then the last book that I read in August was Fake It Till You Bake It by Jamie Wesley. On Goodreads, I said, this was such a cute book. Fake dating plus awesome communication between the main characters plus a cupcake shop. I especially recommend this if you're a fan of Talia Hibbert's The Brown Sisters series. This book was like the perfect mashup of Take a Hint Dani Brown and Act Your Age Eve Brown. This book was very sweet but also very spicy. The main character was in this book's version of The Bachelor, and she was the one that The Bachelor chose, but she turned his proposal down. So now the internet kind of hates her. And then the love interest is a football player and he owns a cupcake shop. And I just really liked their chemistry together. This was a really cute book and I don't think it's one that's like an all-time favorite or anything, but I really enjoyed reading it and it was like a quick, easy read. So I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 and I recommend it. That was everything that I read in August though. I'm really happy with my reading month, both in the amount of books that I read and also just like the quality of books. Let me know in the comments what your favorite book that you read in August was, and I will see you in the next one.